Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have, of course, from the great Midwest, I have RDV. And then I have here also from Central Florida, the young 20-something Professor Pixel. And tonight, we're doing one of our very first Westerns ever. An excellent one, in my opinion, as I can't wait to share that with you guys when we talk about it. It's El Dorado from 1966, starring John Wayne, Robert Mitchum, and a very young James Caan. And if you can believe it, boy, he's been around a really long time. And it's going to be interesting to talk about this film because Westerns were really the meat and potatoes of American cinema for a very long time, and television shows as well. It wasn't always until about, say, the 60s and really about the 70s that they started to fade out. And as a young kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, I was drawn to stuff like the Wild Wild West. But then some Westerns I just couldn't watch. And when shows would be on like Rat Patrol that I just wasn't interested in, but then like Hogan's Heroes came on, that was a comedy. I didn't really understand what was going on. But one of the things I like about El Dorado that I think is good is one, it's a lot of like a TV show that we talked about earlier tonight here on Extreme Movie Show when we talk about Dark Shadows Episode 2, the revival from 1991. It moves. It's edited well. There's no high spots or low spots. It goes. And this is a long movie. This is like 2 hours long. So to me, last week, we had covered Night of the Hunter with Robert Mitchum, easily one of the best movies out of the 50s, in my opinion. Excellent film, just stunning. It's not one I could watch over and over again, whereas I think El Dorado is an excellent film as well. It's certainly not on the level of Night of the Hunter, but it's still fantastic, but it's definitely a lot more watchable. I just like Howard Hawks' style, the way he films with the shadows and the colors, and we've got a lot of characters in here, and it's a pretty simple story. We don't need a special tweak or anything happening here, and things move. It's pretty damn good, too, and I kind of like it. And if you're a Howard Hawks fan, you know that a lot of directors were influenced by him, especially all the big ones out of the 70s. Carpenter, I think Lucas to some extent, Spielberg, a whole bunch of others. So it might have a sense of familiarity with you watching with the way things happen because this is the guy that put the bromance front and center when we talk about characters. So RDV, I know that you do a lot of the action films with me here on the Extreme Movie Show. We've been doing that for several years now too. We intentionally kind of wanted to branch out into different fields that we like. We haven't done a lot of Westerns, so I really have no idea what your take's going to be on this. Why don't you share it with us?
Well, this movie, I was kind of dreading going into it because I just don't like John Wayne.
What?
I know people like him.
Let him explain why.
I just don't like John Wayne. He plays the same character every single role. It's the same character, no matter what movie it is. And to me, it's just kind of overrated. Sorry.
A lot of people feel that way, and I don't disagree with you. And that is a very strong, prevalent thought about John Wayne.
But do you know who I thought outshine here was our boy here, James Caan and Christopher George.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, Mitchum's great in this too. I mean, John Wayne's the older guy, yeah, and then Mitchum's kind of like the drunk sheriff, this little comedy. Caan plays Mississippian here, and just has a lot more energy. And same with Christopher George, who plays Nelson McLeod.
Yeah.
If you're wondering who this guy is, he's from Enter the Ninja. He's the bad guy.
Thank you for the cross reference, sir.
Venarius, that's who he played in there. So overall, I said like John Wayne's like, yes, people look at him as like that's how you raise your he's the man's man. That's what everyone guys should aspire to. I agree with that, but he just comes off like he's an old man. Like here, he gets shot in the back by the girl, and like there's a bullet down lodged by your spine, so it's just like, okay, the guy could most likely die from a heart attack with how old he is in this movie. I'm just sorry. Overall, though, like I said, I like James Caan in this. I've never seen James Caan's young. I've seen Misery, and he was older than this. So it's cool to see him in this, and he plays kind of like the, more like your Robert Redford, He's your, or actually not. I should take that back. Not Robert Redford. I'm trying to think who was the guy who played Cool Hand Luke. Paul Newman. He's the Paul Newman of this movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He's not the man's man per se. Not that he's a wuss ass, but he's the pretty boy.
But I'm saying going into this movie, I was dreading him. Then I started watching. I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually really good. This is funny. I love westerns, but more of my westerns are Clint Eastwood. Those are my westerns.
Right.
I've watched the man who shot Liberty Vance, whatever that was. I love that too because of Jimmy Stewart. I'm sorry. I know Pixel, you love John Wayne.
I love
That's
Jimmy
cool.
Stewart too, but
Yeah,
it's
I just love the people starring opposite of John Wayne.
yeah, yeah. I mean that
The guest stars. You'd say,
my I had a my grandfather on my father's side. They were real Southern people, so they went ahead. They had VHSs into way into the early thousands, I suppose you could say. Um, but my grandfather loved westerns and he loved John Wayne
love the
and
Duke. You know?
yeah, he loved them. And so that there's fond memories there, and that's
Uh,
a lot of the reason. But say
my
you don't like him is a little rough, man.
my grandfather was the same way. He watched a lot of because that's what was always on. It was a lot of John Wayne movies, a lot of them. He liked westerns, so if you wanted to watch a western, it was always John Wayne in that western movie. You really
Well,
found, yeah.
I,
Go
I
ahead.
was going to say that I think you guys are bringing up really important points here because the whole thing with westerns, I think, is lost on people today is that there was a lot less movies at the time and a lot less television programming.
Yep.
So only the stuff that would appeal to the masses that people felt very strong about would make it. And eventually, of course, you'd have daytime TV and soap operas with women staying home and stuff and all that. So there was a bit of a softening and a change in those roles. But John Wayne typified, the current time. Americana, and a lot of people have an issue with that because of his delivery of a speech, because the way he walks is very deliberate. You made the comment about how he plays the same one in each role, and that's not
He
necessarily a
does.
bad thing. You can say the same thing about
No,
Chuck
no,
Norris or
but
others, but if you don't like it, it's front and center. It's like, to me, I'm not a big fan of Jimmy Stewart. I don't say he's a bad actor, but I cannot get over his drawl and his delivery. Some actors can do that, but John Wayne's not one of them. That's his
he
charm, for better or for worse.
I would say he's kind of like the Jason Bateman in most of his films. Basically, he plays the straight face. He's a straight and narrow guy, and then you have the other guys like James Caan, come out here and like they're the ones that kind of annoy him. like that's basically what he is. He's the cool collective one, and then you have the other guys who basically do more of the acting. They do more the emotional range.
Exactly.
He kind of stays in the same thing. It's like, well,
He doesn't
like,
outshine his co-stars, but he
no,
provides a platform for them to all get
yes,
their thing in it, and that's
and
why a lot of people like him.
I like the. I mean, I said there's parts of this movie I like. There's a part in here where he kills the McCowboy, by accident. He's basically riding his horse there. The kid was basically left there by his dad as a lookout. He said, if you see anybody, fire the gun. Well, he fires his rifle because he'd been sleeping. He fires his rifle, and John Wayne thinks he's being shot at, so he shoots up there, shoots him in the guts. And he's like, oh, okay. Goes over there, checks him out, learns who he is, and he's gonna move the kid, but the kid's like not thinking straight. He's got shot in the gun. He's in pain, but he didn't see the kid had a revolver. The kid shoots him in the head. I love the fact that he takes the kid, to the dad, and he's like, well, what happened? He's like, well, exactly what I just said. He explains it. He's like,
It's a moral dilemma.
But I love the fact he says, like, well, you're partial to blame. You told this boy that he didn't have a chance, so he shot himself in the head. That's just, I mean, that leads to him getting shot in the back because the stupid girl who the daughter who basically was angry because he got to leave. She just basically shoots him, and I love how he basically just throws the rifle into the water. So I said that there's some humor with John Wayne, but he said I just always love that he basically builds up the other characters around the movie. Like he's a foundation.
Yeah, there's not a lot of actors can necessarily do it, and the scene you're talking about happens pretty early on. It sets the tone for what's going to happen later.
Yeah.
And so, Pixel, you talked about families and older people and what they liked and didn't. There's different sub-genres of westerns, and Howard Hawks movies generally have their own kind of flavor with it.
Spaghetti westerns, yeah.
Yeah, but then the thing is that in this scene, it's like, when are you presented a moral dilemma early on in anything, especially at all today? And that's why I think some people gravitate to it, because it's like, how do you handle it? And supposedly it may have been a reflection on the way, say with John Wayne being quote unquote the good guy, doing the right thing, how you would handle it. And so that's why people really gravitate to it, because there's definitely a certain structure in these households, and you don't really get that a lot today with things. And so there's a bit, I think, of being adrift for it. I'll talk a little bit about some of the things about the technical matter of the movie, the way it looks and all that here shortly. But Pixel, I want to kind of go to you and talk a little bit about what you notice as far as the characters and those kinds of things, the relationships, not necessarily the plot so much. What stuck out to you?
You know, there's what I'm going to go ahead and say is I think that the characters are definitely played well here. You made a mention of James Caan earlier, RDV, and you're absolutely right. There's this one scene where he just steps into the saloon, and the man that basically killed someone who's like a father to him, he doesn't have a gun on him, but he's pretty much saying you need to stand up, and it's they think that they're going to just take him. He throws a knife like he's a ninja or something and takes him out right then and there. And that's where John Wayne he's watching. And I think that there's this strength in his performance that I really admire.
So now you reminded me of the knife thing. I'm getting Expendables vibes here.
Should be the other way around, really, right?
But I love the fact that he's like, I don't use a gun. It's like, I just use a knife. I'm like, that only works for so much, but it's a cool skill to have, because the guy says like Nels McLeod, says well, he's like, Charlie, stand up. I want to see how he's gonna do this. The guy doesn't even have a gun, and I love it. He just throws the knife real fast, and it's like that whole saloon scene just really I always remember that from watching this movie. Is the saloon scene. I just love the lines, the exchange between Nelson McLeod and John Wayne, and then he's in Mississippi, and then he's like Mississippi's gonna leave, and he's like John's like, hold on, don't go. It's like, stay. He's like, Mister, why do you really want my time? As you find out later at the exchange, he's like, Mr. McLeod, you want to walk out before us? Because there's two goons are out there waiting to shoot at both of them.
Yeah.
So John Wayne plays to his strengths. He's the older guy. He has more experience, and he's the better marksman. Where James Caan is this guy, the guy he's like just was going around getting revenge, and he only has a knife on him. So he's still kind of the noob, or guys would say more like the
experienced in the ways of the world.
Yeah.
They're easily, like young people say, it's a human characteristic. They're going to get triggered easily, and he fights battles with his mind. I mean, and it is the big difference, right? That's how it is.
Yeah.
Age and experience always overcomes youth and treachery, or whatever that expression is.
But that exchange between Nels and John Wayne's character, it's just like the delivery, the lines, and just like they mutual respect each other, professionalism. I just like Nels. You're building up Nels as the bad guy. I love it. Like they're on the same level.
Here's one thing I want to say about that, because that was kind of interesting seeing when we talk about characters and stuff. It sounds simple, but a lot of times it's not done today. In RDV, you and I have talked about this a lot on action films, how things have gone digital. And Pixel, actually thinking about us talking about Dark Shadows earlier tonight kind of makes me think of this too when I talk about effects. We're about a half hour when we have the big knife fight here, if you want to call it that, in the bar scene. And while I'm watching this film, listening to what's going on, it doesn't rush. So it reminds me of, like I say, Dark Shadows, or somebody that knows what they're doing, is a competent technical director, producer, whatever you want to call it, involved. Because you get all these little things add up later on in a way that doesn't, I think it's missed today. We recently talked about Violent Night. I think it's a horrible film because it doesn't do anything good at all. And it's a 2-hour slog fest. Nothing's unique, whatever. Here, you have things that were considered standard fare there, but when El Dorado was shot, it was shot on location, I think like in Tucson, Arizona, around the outskirts. So when they're going around on their horses and the dust is kicking up, part of you watches that, or, RDV, you mentioned going through the water and all that. There's a lot of little you're watching something outdoors. You've got horses, you've got the buildings out there. Even though we know it's a movie, it feels like you're drawn into it. And I got to say this about the women. Obviously, there were standards as far as dressing, all that stuff. These women, generally speaking, here are absolutely gorgeous. They got beautiful dresses on. The camera, though, focuses on them being feminine and their face. Yet there's very strong female roles in here, which you didn't necessarily get at this point. Just like the scene where The lady tries to shoot John Wayne, and she runs up to him, and then he knocks her down. He says, next time you go to shoot somebody, make sure he's dead or whatever. But these women are gorgeous and strong in their own right, and we get, like I say, an incident that happens. We get a lot of little things that kind of just start building up, and it's beautiful because at the heart of it, you could argue that this isn't really like an action movie. You could argue it's almost like a male soap opera with the roles and everything too. And this scene here at the bar really kind of tells that. So even though it's kind of simple, there's a lot to, I think, appreciate in here. So Pixel, being a Western guy and all that too, I don't know how many you've watched or what you're drawn towards, but at this point, about a third of the way in, what's your vibe?
Well, actually, most of the, it's oddly enough, it would probably be watching, I believe, Gunsmoke. Yeah, that would be most of my Western vibe, where you have just shorter stories going ahead, so that way you don't have to watch the previous episode, but it goes ahead and fills it in for the hour.
Right.
But here, yeah. And I think there's something very insightful here. Going ahead and reading up more about the movie as well. Meacham, which we've talked about, Robert Mitchum, he went ahead and said that whenever he was told about this movie and asked if he wanted to do it, he asked about so what's the story? And he was pretty much told that there's no story, just characters, and Robert Mitchum went ahead and said that's the way it was. We did one scene, you put it away, and you do another, and you put that away as well. And I think that for that, I think that actually is an interesting way to do it. There are obviously movies and shows that have done that before, where they have multiple routes that they can go, and so they just film all they can and then they piece it together. But if you had told me that at the beginning, I don't know if I could have seen that. But it's interesting to go ahead and read that.
Yeah, and I think that when you talk about westerns, this is a movie shot, like I say, in the mid '60s, whatever. Westerns are starting to be on their way out, and this is a movie that would have fit in 10 years earlier, 20 years when they were even more wildly popular. And I think that when you look at some of these here, if you're a Robert Mitchum fan, you're probably going to like him in here. If you're a John Wayne fan, you're going to like him here. If you're can't be a James Caan fan because he's relatively young in here, but if you like westerns, it's one of the last, I think, really, really good westerns. Charlton Heston did one, I think, in 1979, 1980 called Will Penny, which actually is a Christmas movie, but it's a western as well, and that was a throwback. But this film, some of the criticisms I've heard about it is that, it's exactly how you described it. It's mostly about characters and the plot about, well, this person's trying to get the water rights, and it's kind of like I'm hiring you to do this job, but you don't realize I'm trying to steal it back and all that. And it's not really that important. It's just it exists to put everybody together, and that's okay as long as we enjoy it. And I think at this point, you look at the costumes and all that. You feel like you're drawn in. And one more point about the way it's filmed, I want to bring this up. I'm obviously a big John Carpenter mark, and I talk about his films a lot, even though we've only reviewed a few of them. And I can see some parallels with what he does in here. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is Dean Cundy, who's done a tremendous amount, probably some of the most best-looking films of all time. If you just look at his work, he was on a cinematographer for a lot of Carpenter films, and then he uses a lot of shadow. He uses a lot of like what I call lens flare and other things too. This movie, the print I've got, gorgeous, very simple. It's got a lot of shadows and depth to it, even though the set pieces might be like in a prison jail, but you throw in an old oil lamp in the background and let it do its thing with a few other lights, and you've got a little bit of cinema magic here. It's not that monochrome kind of dilated filters we see with digital things there too. So that's one of the things about these older films, is that for the most part they can hold up pretty well, and there's a richness to film that no matter how good digital might be for lots of reasons, and cheap being one of them, it doesn't hold up. So there's something to be said about watching a movie and looking at what's going on in the background with the props. And of course, it's a Western with guns, the horses, the women, the saloons, the sound of the spurs. And RDV, we've got to talk about this with the guns. You mentioned the knife. When the shooting happens early on, We've talked about this. The last time I heard a gun sound good in a film was Michael Mann's Collateral when Tom Cruise was the hitman, right? Because Michael Mann appreciates that stuff. You had that in Miami Vice. And here I'm like, oh, this sounds good. It sounds like pretty powerful, but it's not a shootout kind of film. Not the way
No,
some things are.
the guns, the fact they're on live horses, they're not on like a little thing like holding. They're not bouncing on little like a horse head with a stick, like for kids do. They actually had them like riding a horse, and the guy's on a camera riding a horse with them. At least it looked that way. But the guns in here, it goes back to the saloon. The guy thinks he's gonna draw, and Thornton, John Wayne says nope. Shoots him right in the guy in the gun hand. Hits the gun right out of his hand. That was kind of cool seeing that. And hearing the noise, like it's like it's actually a real gun noise. You're seeing it now. They're firing blanks, obviously, but and they're pulling the trigger themselves because they take credit for what they do. But no so I want to point out though that the guns are awesome here. And that's the one that I think makes it cool because a lot of people that will just use cap guns,
Yeah.
But they dub the sound over it, These guys actually had the real guns, so when they actually shot, like they see it like he's teaching Caan how to basically or Mississippi how to fire a gun. You see it shooting, it actually hit something, so they fired a gun because I don't think if they would have thrown a rock, it would have made a different way. So the cool part though is now because James Caan character can't shoot a gun because he has horrible aim. He goes and gets him a little sawed-off shotgun, a little,
That's right. He's the shotgun.
So and he's like, "I'll go and hit that cactus." All right. Oh my! So I was like, I love that was just so like. I guess the footage they used for that, it didn't really match. It's like they captured from like they took it from something else or something or recorded at a different time.
Yeah, you had to be on point with your editing back then because
it was like, dang, it's like he fired a cannon. And he says like, "Gee, now you can't miss." So
the scene where they're having to shoot out with the goons, it brought back a lot of memories of what I always thought with westerns. And today, when you go to like so-called Western reproductions and Pixel, here in Central Florida, we have dozens of them too. We've had some old rodeos like down in Kissimmee and other places, and where you have your Western show and there'd always be a shootout. And the one bad guy would always be shot at the second, third floor, and he would fall forward and land on the ground. And then here you get several of those, the guy, falling and trying to grab the rope, and the bells are going off. It's at night. It's kind of a cool scene too. You get all that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's always guys on the roofs getting shot with repeater rifles, and you see him fall, and sometimes you hear him scream. He holds his chest and he falls over.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
No, I want to point out that this movie though, when they made this movie, this is right after Rio Bravo, so and they kind of kept the same thing, the same director, Hawk, I think is
Hawks, yeah, Howard
Hawks. So he basically kept the same story where a sheriff has to defend a town from a bunch of bandits. So he did that in Rio Bravo, did it in this movie, and then he does it again in Rio Lobo, all with John Wayne.
Pixel, if you hear what RDV's saying, this should remind you, I would think, of what we're going through right now because we just finished up Moonraker and our James Bond reviews. We talk about the Bond template, right?
Yep. Mr. Pixel?
Oh, looks like we do have some technical difficulties.
Sorry, I didn't realize. When you deal with an external mic, you have a mute button on there too, and I pressed that.
No, I was just saying RDV's comment about this being a lot like Rio Bravo and everything too.
Yeah, there's movies.
They're all basically the same.
Yeah, pretty much. There's this rule in creative works. Whatever you do, it's going to be based off of something. And James Bond, there's a template and a formula in how it works. Marvel movies, I know we don't like to talk about those here, but they, for a long time, also had a formula. And for the most part, they still do. But that's another conversation. But with that, you stick to it, you get your story beats in, and then at the end, you're either celebrating or you have a tear in your eye or whatever the emotion they're trying to evoke from you. And a movie that is able to use its template well and tell the story completely and still keep you entranced. Even though you've seen this movie, it's worth a watch.
Yeah, I always pop RDV when certain things happen in movies. I know I always like to joke and talk about the food in the background and the suits and some of
Yeah.
those kinds of things. But I also will compare it to like 80s stuff and all that because of our age differences, and that's kind of interesting. But one thing with watching this movie too, I kind of popped a little bit is I always forgot how much I love globes and maps. As I guess as part of being a guy thing, I'm entranced by them. But like here when they're in the jail and they have the giant map of Texas with all the counties in the background, maps like that don't exist today. Not that people look at them or use them or whatever, because everything's on their phone, but it just makes you feel like, yeah, that map goes back with the undiscovered country or the land of the blah, 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 or whatever. And guys standing around holding guns and drinking coffee and all that. It's like, okay, it feels pretty good to me. I mean, obviously this movie kind of has what I would call a good ending. It is just over 2 hours long. So it's not short. And if it got cut a lot and you watched a reduced version, I don't know if it holds up that well, but this is the type of movie that I think goes with a lot of things. We'll watch anything that's a Tom Cruise movie for the most part, for better or for worse. Same thing with Shatner and a few others. And at this point, if you're not a John Wayne fan, you may not like this film. But if you're a Mitchum fan and James Caan, obviously he's older now, but he's been in a lot of stuff. He's in here too. He does a great job in it. So I like the mix there. But ultimately, this is an action bromance to me, and I think it's done well. It's very pretty to watch. The women are strong in there. It's got a lot of the elements that we like when we talk about movies. And shout out to you for mentioning Enter the Ninja with Franco Nero,
Yeah.
the second best ninja movie of all time, which of course is just behind its sequel, Revenge of the Ninja with Sho Kosugi.
Yep.
Because as we discovered here, the more you watch movies and this night, you're like, oh, this is the guy that was in this or that, or this is the woman that played this role. Now she's like this. And it's like, oh my God, I didn't realize it. And that's somehow I think some of the fun parts about this to kind of happen too. But yeah, I like this film a lot. I think it's definitely worth a watch. If anybody doesn't know what a Western is, they want to see what a good one is, El Dorado is up there. It's family friendly, but it has adult themes in it. It's serious with the guns, but not gory or graphic. And it's got characters that exemplify different traits of human nature in it. And that never gets old no matter what it is. Let's go around for our final thoughts here and any other observations we might have about this. RDV?
Final thoughts. This is a lot better ending than Butch Cassidy and a Sundance Kid, which was another bromance. Not to say that wasn't a good movie. That was still entertaining. It's just that this is a happier ending. That's all. There's a scene here where when Thornton comes to town, or just before he's going to leave after he gets operated on, early because he patch him up, he gets shot. Everyone's going to have a go-away party. Even the doc's there too. They're all just having whiskey. I just love it. And like Bull comes in and he's like, what the heck? Where's I brought my own whiskey because I know you guys weren't going to offer. He's like, well, you didn't ask. He's like, I didn't think you're going to offer. So I just love the looks. And it's as I'm watching this, it's no hidden secret that I love playing games like Red Dead Redemption and all that stuff. Those games, those Western games, and it just has that same feeling. So it's like
just make it look like El Dorado. Absolutely, that's exactly where people go for the source material. Yeah.
And the other thing I was confused with, because usually when people say El Dorado, it's to search for gold. The hidden city of gold in South America. But this was like, no, this was all about this a guy basically bought all this land, or after the war, is after like World War One, I think. What war is it supposed to be after?
Whatever.
No, Civil War. That's what it is. Civil War. That's what it is. It's right after.
Yeah, it has to be a Civil War. It's not.
Yeah, because the Western. Yeah, never mind. So right after the Civil War, this guy comes back. The guy plays, and it's what's Ed Asner.
Ed Asner, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I was like, oh my gosh, he's so young. See, he's the bad guy in this. He had all this money there. They're kind of like Mitchum's like, I don't know where he got this money from, but he's like, he's bad news, and he wants this other group of families. He wants the McDonald's. He wants their water because they've been there for 20 years. They have a farm and they have control of the river and the water. So all it is like, this is like, man, every Western movie you've seen where they're fighting over like somebody wants control of the water,
Well, water rights are a big deal out
Yeah.
there, and even recent films like the Milagro Beanfield War and a few others, some Charles Bronson movies deal with stuff like that. It's definitely a thing when you talk about
And
farms and whatnot.
even all the way until
Chinatown even has it as a plot.
even until Knight Rider, there was a plot with this where they wanted the control of the water.
Yeah.
As like, and that being said, even though these are copy and paste stories, it's the acting which sells the non-really. The story is basically like generic, but it's the deliverance of the performance by the actors which sells it, makes it more entertaining. The gunfighting, the women being women, supporting supporting the guys. It's just there was no oh, I'm sorry, we can't do this. Someone might be offended. No, they did it, and if you got offended, too bad. Go watch the next movie. It's I miss that in Hollywood. Before everything became, oh, you had to cater to this, cater to this. It got to the point where there's no creativity anymore because somebody might be offended. And when I watch this stuff, it's spaghetti western stuff like this. It's just great. Man, I gotta look up to see if John Wayne's ever been in a movie with Clint Eastwood, because that would be awesome.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what you think about that, especially as we talk about more westerns over the years here on the Xtreme Movie Show. Professor Pixley, the young 20-something Central Floridian, give it to me. What's your final take on this film? Should somebody in your age group, your generation, whatever the hell they're called these days, even think about watching El Dorado?
I mean, I think that there are plenty of people in my generation that need to expose themselves to not that kind. Expose themselves to plenty of films to help just grow themselves as people, because this is giving you a slice of America. And I feel like what we talked about at the beginning of this, like my grandfather loved these films, watched them till the day he died. And I know plenty of other people just a couple generations away that still, they love these movies. They love this genre. And this genre is sadly just like it exists, barely exists. It barely exists. So you need to go ahead and just dig into the classics. And that's where you'll find it. And this is one of them.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's one of the first big major ones that we wanted to do. So I wanted it to be a classic one, and one that, I at least recall somewhat, from my youth and all that. I thought this would be one that we all might like certain aspects about it too. So I'm pleased to hear that we've all enjoyed certain things, because we're definitely not going to agree, and that's why we like to discuss it here too. Yeah, it's pretty cool that we get a chance to talk like that. So I'm sure we'll be revisiting some more of those again. Obviously, for those of you listening, we just got through doing our Dark Shadows season 1, episode 2 of the revival. Check that out. We'll be doing our next James Bond movie here in December. That'll of course be For Your Eyes Only, which will be a remarkable thing to discuss, especially coming after Moonraker, which is very divisive.
That's right. It's for your eyes only. Don't tell anybody else.
That's right. Top secret. Then Tuesday night we have Tulsa King. The next episode is that episode 3, I believe we'll be doing, or 4 actually. 4.
Can you believe that? I can. No, I want to point out though, this El Dorado was adapted to comic book form by Dell Comic Books back in 1967. So I'm curious to look for this. I want to read the comic book version of this.
That might be worth discussing and bring up on y'all's channel. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, if I can find
I didn't even think about that, to be honest with you, because a lot of that stuff would be good source material, because we know Carpenter's crossed over. A lot of other people have too.
Yeah. A lot of westerns, a lot of stuff, old movies like Zorro and stuff Dell took them and did comic book adaptations of them.
Interesting. All right, guys, there you have it. El Dorado, 1966. Check it out. A great Western film. For RDV and Professor Pixel and everybody involved here at the Xtreme Movie Show, I'd like to say thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Have a good night. And as always, stay extreme.
Good night, Pilgrim.
And stay out of trouble.